a number of industries, but the construction industry off and on for decades have experienced worker shortages as projects and boom times come and go. Uh, the current one that we're in, I would argue that except for a brief reprieve back in maybe 2008, 2009, it's probably been going on for for more than 20 years. And I would describe the current one that is going on as probably acute and been going on since about 2010, 2011. So what I would like to do for just a few minutes is take a look at the makeup of our workers over the years, over the past several decades. I've been involved, like I say, for over 40 years. So I have a sort of a feel for where some of the workers came from early on, and then where we're seeing them today. If you go back to, I would argue that maybe sometime in the mid 60s, late 60s is when we first started seeing a transition in our workforce. Prior to that, our workforce was a typical Anglo male, maybe late teens, early 20s, graduated from high school, had no college plans, and was looking to get a career going. And construction offered at the time a very good middle class, blue collar career choice. A person was able to enter the trade, learn a trade, and support a family and make a decent living. But somewhere along the line in the late 60s, the college desire entered the picture. I think a lot of that maybe came from obviously parents who maybe have been in construction or maybe some other middle class industry that said, hey, look, you need to have a life that's a little better than mine. Go to college, get an education, get a degree, and do better than I've done. Also, if you recall, and you may not recall, depending on your age, in the late 60s, we were mired in the Vietnam War, and a lot of folks, young males, in an effort to avoid having to go to Vietnam, entered college for the deferrals that were in place at the time. They did do away with those, but so what we saw in the late 60s and early 70s is this shift to go to the college, and that's kind of persisted from that day forward. So where we are today and what we're experiencing is much different than the workforce we saw and that was available to us in the 60s and early 70s. I tell you what, let's take a look. Deborah, if you would throw up our first slide, and let's talk about what's going on in the workforce. And what I would argue right now is that the sources, especially the traditional sources, have largely dried up. One of the things that's happening, and I mentioned it just a few minutes ago, is the blue collar middle class high school graduate that was looking to start a career is just not out there. And sometimes I use these big generalizations. It doesn't mean that they're absolutely not there at all. It just means by and large they're not. So if you hear me make some pretty broad generalizations, that's what I'm doing. But what's going on is the workforce demographics are just working against us. The subcontracting community, we have obviously strong manpower needs, more than general contractors do. But what's going on with the workforce demographics is the age and income and education and gender and even race are kind of working against us. We're not picking up the young ones out of high school like we did many decades ago. We're missing out in the gender race because traditionally construction has not been a female occupation, and that represents 50% of our population and potential applicant pool. So we're losing out in there. And then as income and education increases, and that's what's going on in today's world, people aren't opting for construction. So we've got some demographics that's staring us right in the face that are actually working very much against us. And then the other thing that's going on is the generational influence that was present once upon a time has all but disappeared. In fact, it's kind of going in the opposite direction. And what I mean by generational influence is that in the old days, if your dad was a carpenter or your grandfather was a carpenter, then you would become a carpenter. It just came down through the generations of the family. And that was very prevalent, uh, especially after World War II when we had a building boom in 40s, 50s, and 60s, even to the 70s. We saw this generational influence where we could just almost count on a son or a grandson to become a construction worker if that was what the family had done. But what we're seeing now, I think, is that parents are actually going in the opposite direction, and a little bit to what I alluded to earlier. They're actually sort of discouraging their children to go into construction. They're saying, look, go get an education, go do something different, do yourself a little better than what I was able to do. And not that they had a bad living, but there's just so many more opportunities out there today. So we've got this generational influence that's just not working to our benefit right now. And if you look at the construction industry and the economy as a whole, most of the U.S. is booming right now. In the old days, it seemed like there would be always pockets where it was busy and then other pockets where it was less busy. And there was this notion of a journeyman tradesman. And this journeyman would follow the work wherever it was. He had a trade that he could apply anywhere. So he was willing to pick up himself. And if he had a family, his family, and they would move to wherever the work was. And the term journeyman obviously came from that. But he would follow the work. And so what we're seeing in today's markets is everybody's busy. And so no one's moving, no one's following the work. The work is already there where they're at. So what we're suffering from is just the inability to bring people from other markets. And again, there's still some movement, but it's not like what we have seen historically. The next item I'd like to talk about, and I was a little hesitant of putting this one in because right now, the southern border is not necessarily secure, but I left it in there only because what I see happening in relation to that is that the folks that are coming across right now are your refugees, your minors, your migrant families. And what I'm not seeing at least I don't feel like I'm seeing, is the workers that used to come across the southern border just for the work, for the sake of work. So although there's a lot of infiltration from the South, it's folks that we really can't bring into our workforce. So the southern border is pretty secure. And so we're not picking up workers there. And when I'm saying workers, I'm not saying all are undocumented. A lot of immigrants, migrants come in legally. And of course, there is the illegal portion that come up and understand how to work the system. They get the documents that are necessary to be employed in the United States, and they sort of just slip through the system that way. And then another thing that I think is working against us and really causing our source of manpower to dry up is our education system. It still doesn't connect with us in a big way. There's just not enough preparation for careers like construction going on in a high school. And that's been going on for quite some time. And I've seen a little bit of a resurgence over the last several years, but it's pretty spotty. It's very well lacking. It's just not there. So we don't connect with education. I'm not sure it's our fault. I think it's probably a little bit on both sides, but the educational system is just not delivering the workers we want. In fact, and I know a lot of you can probably relate to this, but we do get some entry-level workers that are straight out of high school, and many of them can't even read a tape measure, a ruler. They can't add or subtract fractions. And so it's almost like starting behind square one when you do hire these folks. So I think our education system in many ways is failing the construction industry. So let's look to the next slide and talk a little bit about the existing worker pool, because like I say, the sources that we've traditionally depended on has evaporated. So what about the existing pool that we're pulling from? And Deb, if you would you throw that slide up, and we'll talk a little bit about what I think is happening with the existing worker pool. The first thing that comes to my mind is the amount of retirement that's going on just in our country. The baby boomers are retiring at a pretty rapid pace. I think the construction industry had its share or more than its share of the baby boomers. And that's the folks that were born between 1946 and 1964. So their age range right now, the youngest set of them are around 58 and the oldest ones are 76. And many of our trades are sort of a young man's game, if you will. And so a lot of the folks that we had as baby boomers and that are in our work pool, they're retiring. They're leaving. They're moving on to something else if they're still continuing to workplace. But we do see a lot of the baby boomers over the last several years actually leaving us. The next thing that's going on is there's a lot of new industries that are just really siphoning the workers that we would normally have. I mean, if you think of all the jobs that exist now that didn't exist, let's say 25 years ago, and obviously a lot of them are built around computers and the internet and technology, but there's just a lot of industries out there that we didn't have to compete with 25 and 30 years ago, and now we do, and they're pretty attractive. When you weigh out, doing something related to, let's say, software or technology or the internet versus working on a job site, I mean, it can look pretty attractive to somebody that's got a choice now. So the new industries definitely are siphoning our workers and really shrinking our pool that we pull from. And then, of course, other industries are now taking a bigger slice of the pool. I'm thinking restaurants, service industries, fast food, hospitality even. A lot of these industries previously weren't really competitors to subcontractors and the construction industry as a whole. Most of them paid lower wages, entry-level wages, say minimum wage or a little bit before, maybe in the $7.25 to $10 range, and we could always best that a little bit, and so we never regarded them as competition for our workers. And a lot of folks that did go into those industries eventually left them and came into other careers that had a little higher wage opportunities. But since the pandemic, especially, you're seeing restaurants and fast food places paying $12, $15, $18 an hour, and that's up there with some of the wages that we pay. And so when they have this choice of working in a restaurant or working in some service industry and making as much as they could doing, so let's say, manual construction work, they're going to tend to go towards those other industries. It's unfortunate, but that's really what the underlying thing is happening is we're losing those workers because their wage rates have gone up, and ours have gone up too, but I don't think they've gone up as much, and so folks are sticking to those industries as opposed to using them as a stepping stone to get into a career like construction. Another item that's going on that's been underway for several years, but I've seen it a lot more lately, is cash and 1099 pay arrangements that lure W-2 employees away from the contractors like yourselves and like MEMCO, who pay by the hour and withhold taxes and all that. And a lot of these are undocumented, but many of them aren't. We get folks all the time applicants come into the MEMCO office, and the first thing they do is announce, hey, I'm a 1099 worker. And that's what they're looking for. They don't want taxes withheld. They don't want to be subject to maybe child deductions for child care or for IRS wage deductions or garnishments. So they're just looking if they're a 1099 contractor or employee, the way they look at it, if they're making $20 an hour, $800 a week, they get to take home $800 a week. And so I've seen this shift where these folks that have gone into this 1099 pay arrangements, it's real tough to get them out and back paying taxes and having deductions come out of their paycheck. And that's a real issue right now. And we don't get a whole lot of help. Of course, we don't get a lot of help from the government as a whole, but there's not a lot of enforcement from the Department of Labor, or IRS, or Wage and Hour to help us out there. So those of us that are paying by the hour, that are good, legitimate subcontractors, we're getting hurt by those that find other opportunities in the 1099 pay arrangement. And then the next thing I'd argue is that we actually lost a lot of workers, not necessarily today, but they self-deported back during the Trump administration because of the anti-immigrant sentiment that was part of that. And you would say, well, we lost the undocumented, but that's not really the case, because we have in the United States right now, and especially in our industry, a lot of what I'd call mixed families. So a legal worker, a good legal worker that was born here, his dad or maybe his mom was undocumented, or maybe his spouse. And so what happens is during this anti-sentiment period, they were fearful that their families would be split up, and they didn't want to lose their undocumented spouse or parent to get deported back to their home country. So a lot of them simply didn't care for the harassment, didn't care for that, living in that fearful condition, and actually self-deported. And we saw that happen. I won't say a ton, but it's certainly a factor. And when we're in construction and our pool is already shrinking, we don't need something else coming in and even taking just a handful. So I've seen that happen. And of course, we have the great resignation taking place as a result of the pandemic. And I don't think I have seen that much in the construction industry. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of folks that just said, I'm throwing in the towel as a construction worker. But what has happened is it certainly happened in other industries, and therefore their needs are greater. So their wages go up and they start pulling people from us. So we are impacted by the great resignation, whether it's direct or whether or not it's a ripple effect. So the existing pool, like I say, is shrinking for all of these reasons. There's probably a few more out there. So where did that leave us, and what do we do? Deborah, if you just advance it a slide, I'll just it's pretty obvious now what the dilemma is. Our existing worker pool is shrinking, diminishing, and our labor sources are disappearing. So that's our dilemma, and that's what we have to address. And that's a little bit about, a lot about what we're talking about today, and what I want to talk about in just a few minutes about the challenge and what are some of the answers and solutions there are. But the one thing I do want to restate, is that this has been going on over time. It's not something that is happening as a result of the pandemic. It's not something that happened in the last 3 or 4 years. This has actually been happening over decades. And I'm not saying we've been asleep at the switch, so to speak, but we certainly haven't been able to keep up with what these two issues are creating for us. So, and there's been some small steps taken forward. Maybe some of you actually have taken some great steps, but by and large, I think the construction industry as a whole has been somewhat asleep at the switch, as our workforce is slipping away from us, and we don't really have a game plan for what to do. But Deborah, if you move us to the next slide, I'll just kind of surmise where we are and where that leaves us. So here's what I'm seeing, and what I think is going to happen is, or where we are anyway, these trends that I've talked about with the age and demographic, I don't see those changing. The bread and butter is not going to reemerge. These kids coming out of high school and jumping right into a career with construction that's got some basic, maybe math skills, whatever, that's not going to happen. I think we're going to continue to see the kind of workers coming to us that we've seen over the last few years. Not that they're bad, but it's just we're going to continue to struggle with the age and demographics that are not in our favor right now. So I think the bottom line is, we're going to continue, our labor pool is going to continue just to shrink. Okay, so there's going to be more of us, or an equal number of us, competing for a fewer number of people. And of course, that drives up wages, which is not all bad, but it certainly causes problems when you're trying to build a job, complete a job. It leads you into overtime. It leads you into all kind of problems, production-wise and productivity-wise and cost-wise. So that's not a good situation to be in. And the other thing that this has all led to is construction is going to continue to be what I'm going to call a default career choice. For decades, the average age of a construction worker, of an entry-level construction worker, has been almost 30 years old. And so what that tells me is that workers who either leave high school and go to college and either finish college or don't finish college, but they should be entering the workforce anywhere in the 18, 19 to 22, 23-year-old range. And we don't pick those up. We pick them up when they're almost 30. And so that tells me that we're not their first career choice. So they go out and they try other things that for whatever reason doesn't work. And eventually they come around to us when they're, like I say, when they're almost 30 years old. I know a lot of them, the construction industry has a stigma, we do, that, it's hard work, very manual, seasonal, even to some degree unsafe. And that's a stigma that sort of keeps folks away from us until they've tried a lot of different attempts at careers and maybe we're the default career that they eventually come to. So I think what's going to happen is, unless we have this incredible economic downturn where there's no new construction going on, I think finding skilled workers for our workforce is going to continue to be a challenge. And I'm saying skilled workers, but I think it also applies to any worker. I mean, I think finding unskilled workers, semi-skilled workers, entry-level workers, I think all of those are going to be a challenge to find as we move forward. And I guess at this point, I pretty much sound like a Debbie Downer here, and I don't mean to do that. What I'm trying to do is paint what I think is a realistic picture of where we are, because I think it's real important as we move through these issues and these challenges. I think it's important to know where we are so that we can figure out perhaps where we know where we need to be, but we need to see, okay, how do we get there? So I think it's important to take a realistic look at where we are in relation to the workforce. So I apologize if I'm being a Debbie Downer, but just trying to get everybody with a reality dose this morning, so that as you move through this session, I know you had day one yesterday and today's day two, you can maybe start to see some of the things that maybe individual contractors yourself have to start to look at or focus on in order to be in a better position as it relates to the workforce. So what are some of the answers, and what is it that we need to do? Deborah, if you wouldn't move us on to the next slide, and we'll talk about some of the things that we need to be doing. And again, this is all things that you've probably thought of, but some things I'll bring up for you. I think the smartest thing that each of us can do is just recognize who we are and what our resources are. And I think what that does a lot of times will lead us to, maybe I should think smaller rather than global. Because what I see a lot of times is the small and medium-sized subcontractors, they wonder and worry about what some of the big boys are doing to address these challenges. And the big boys a lot of times have the resources and they have the need, in such large numbers that they've got to do something. But I see smaller and middle-sized contractors trying to emulate what the big boys are doing. And I would say that's not a good course, because you may not have the resources or the staying power to do what they do. So I think approach it based on your needs. If you're a smaller contractor and your needs are a handful of folks, focus on that and try to figure out how to get that smaller number. It's a lot easier than trying to get big numbers and then pare down from there. So if you have the ability to think smaller, think smaller. I think that'll be more successful for a lot of us. The next thing is we got to increase our wages. And I know wages have gone up over the last several years, especially, and especially the last couple of years during the pandemic. But we have to look for ways to increase our wages, perhaps even greater than we've done already. And that's an issue in itself. I think all of you can identify with the fact that it's real hard to bring in, let's say, an entry-level worker at $18 an hour when you're seasoned 10-year veterans making 20. And so it sends this ripple effect all through your workforce when you start bringing in new workers, maybe not even entry level. Maybe they're just new to the company and maybe they have similar skill sets, but you've got a 10-year employee versus a one-day employee and they're making the same. So increasing wages comes with its own challenges. And I'm not going to say I have a solution for you, but I think we have to find ways to get our wage structure up so that we're competitive with not only our own competitors in other trades, but maybe other industries as well. So it's easier said than done, no doubt, but I think that's a direction that we definitely need to head. And then one of the things that I think is crucial, and a lot of employers and contractors are hesitant to do is train. MEMCO is a staffing company, and a lot of times we get these entry-level workers in, and they seem to have good work ethic. They've got a good work history, perhaps in other trades, or not other trades, but other business, and they seem to have a good attitude. And they're just looking for a start. And so we identify these and we try to pass those along to our customers, and our customers say, no, I don't want to train anybody. Send me somebody that's already trained, that can do it all. And in these days and times, I don't think we have the luxury to sit on that approach. I think we have to change our mindsets and start thinking about, okay, I need to train these folks. I need to give them the tools and skills myself. I can't just expect them to walk in the door with them already. And I think a lot of times you have to do that internally as well within your own organization. I'm not seeing a lot of third-party training programs that I can really be high on. I think what works best for an individual subcontractor is to be willing to take an entry-level worker with limited skills, bring them to their workforce. Within any workforce, there's always folks who are natural-born teachers, trainers. Identify who those people are and put these new hires with those folks and develop your own people. They'll learn how you go to task, what your expectations are as far as quality, safety, production, and you build the kind of worker you want. So don't rely on a third party necessarily. And you've got to have that mindset that I'm going to have to train my own. The experienced worker that can walk in and do it all is just not there. And then I think we got to figure out how to bring females into the trades. It's 50% of the population, 50% of the pool out there. And I've seen various numbers as far as percentages of females in the workforce. I've seen as high as 25%, but I think that's the ones that are counting everybody in the office, project managers, admin, support people, so forth and so on. But I think if you get down to the trades person out in the field, I think the number of females that's in our workforce is somewhere around 10%. And I think we've got to raise that. And it's not easy. It's kind of like increasing wages. That's got its own set of challenges as well, because construction, it's no secret, we're very male-oriented, male-dominated, and it's tough bringing in a female and for her to have the kind of respect and support from her male counterparts that you would want her to have. But you've got to build this sort of mindset again with your existing workforce that, folks, we don't have a choice here. We've got to bring these females in. They bring a lot to the table. Many of them do. They're excellent workers. I get a lot of comments from contractors that say, hey, on Monday mornings, the female workers are always the ones that show up. My males, it's a crapshoot. So anyway, females bring a lot to the table. I think we've got to figure out how we bring them into our workforce successfully, and that's the challenge. But I think you really need to take a close look at tapping into the female gender, because there's just not enough males out there that's willing to come into construction. So we just can't have our blinders on. We've got to open it up to females. And then, of course, we got to be innovative. We got to kick over every rock. The internet, social media, they reach a lot of people. They reach a lot of people on a free basis. For the most part, you can buy advertising on the internet. I don't recommend that, but just Facebook posting that one of your employees or your company post, it gets spread among the community like wildfire, and it's a very effective way to reach a lot of folks. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to show up at your doorstep, but again, you've got to think outside the box a little bit. And I'm old school, and so it's hard for me to grasp how that can work on your behalf. But I've been shown by our younger folks. So I truly believe that all of us need to start figuring out how to make the internet and social media and some of the other internet resources available to us. And then I would urge you, in spite of that, stick with the tried and true. Employee referrals and getting family members to come in your company is really your best bet. You're not going to get the numbers maybe that some of these other sources of recruiting will bring, but you're probably going to have better retention of the ones you bring in. I mean, when an employee brings in a family member or somebody, a close friend, or a family member brings in their family, they're not going to necessarily bring in a dud. They're going to bring in somebody they think will work and fit within the organization. And so I think we get a lot better quality of applicant when it's a referral from a family member or from just an employee. And I think we get much better retention from those. So don't forget those. Okay, those are incredibly valuable tools to bring people in the door. And then after all is said and done, you've got to have systems in place, not only just to recruit, but to train them and retain them. And we talked a little bit about training, but retention is critical too. I mean, it's just, there's just not one growing on every tree that you can go out there and pluck a replacement. So if you get an employee in the door and he's good, or let's say he's got potential, don't let him slip away. I mean, have yourself some programs in place. I'm not sure it can encompass a lot of things. One of the biggest successes to employee retention is employee relations, good employee relations, because people have choices now, more choices than they had in previous times. And so if they feel good about the employer that they're working for, they're going to stick around. If they feel like there's opportunity, that there's good employee treatment, their pay is correct every Friday and timely, those things go a long ways to retaining folks. So just make sure that you're the type of company somebody would want to work for. And that includes creating career paths for them if you can. I mean, everybody wants to move up. Everybody's looking for advancement. Everybody's looking obviously for higher wages, and to get higher wages, you got to be able to increase your value from an employee perspective. So you've got to have those opportunities laid out in front of them so they can advance, they can increase their value and therefore increase their wages. So think about retaining more people. They're just not growing on trees out there anymore. And I know some of the problems we have, construction industry, a lot of it's disappearing, but I used to refer to them as hard hats from hell. But we have a lot of old school superintendents and supervisors that just it's trial by fire. They get a new hire on their job site, and they're going to have to succeed in spite of everything thrown at them. And So anyway, look for ways not only to recruit, train, but retain your employees, because they're going to be hard to replace. And then I want to talk a little bit about what else could help us out. And Deb, if you would advance the slide, we'll talk a little bit about some things that maybe not so much in our control, but that would certainly help us. And the first thing I've got listed is owners and developers need to figure out how to take on a role in this worker shortage issue. GCs aren't going to do it because they don't have a lot of skin in the game. It's the subcontractors that have the manpower, that has the risk, that have the challenges of workforce issues. It's not so much a general contractor, and they're not going to do anything unless the owner or the developer does it. And the ones I'm thinking of right now would be the ones I will consider perpetual builders. There's educational systems, school districts, university systems, hospital systems. These folks are perpetual builders, and they have a vested interest in making sure that there's enough qualified workers available to build their projects. And yet they engage in making sure that happens almost nil. And it's in their best interest. Now, how do you convince them it's in their best interest or make them aware? That's a tough road there, but they have a vested interest in it, especially these perpetual builders. If they would just look at the value proposition instead of taking low bid, for instance, and I think a lot of you guys that's in the audience would fall into this value proposition favorably, is, when these perpetual builders, when they take the low bid, they're just asking for ongoing maintenance issues, cost throughout the life of the usable life of the project, not the construction phase, but for years and decades down the road. And so if they just went up front, paid a little more for a higher quality product, then it would save them money down the road on maintenance issues. And so anyway, it would be hard to convince them that, but somehow I would like for the owners and developers to figure that out and start taking an active role, whatever it may look like, in making sure there's a workforce. And part of it would be for them to require on their jobs that all employees are paid, W-2 with taxes withheld and insurance withheld, and that the contractors do engage in some sort of training and all that. I mean, the owners could actually specify that to the GC, and of course the GC could specify it on down the line. But getting there may be a little difficulty. It may be a little pie in the sky, but that's something that really would help us out a lot. And then the next thing I think is education, and I'm thinking of the secondary high school education system right now. I would like to see it shift its mindset and prepare more students properly for career and technology careers. And I'm not knocking, this is not about educators either. I'm not knocking the educators, teachers, because I think they get it. I mean, I've sat on school advisory boards for decades, and to me, the teachers get it. They know who their students are that are college worthy and who need to think about preparing for a career. But it's the other parts of the campus, the administration, the counselors. They're the ones that they've got two goals in mind. One is to get everybody prepared for college, and number two is have a very high graduation rate, and that's their focus. And so and they'll do anything and everything to make those two things happen. And they care less, and again, I'm generalizing, they care less about preparing them properly for what their likely future is going to look like. And so I wish our education system would just have this mindset that say it's okay not to go to college. It's okay for us to prepare you for a future in construction or some other trade, give you some skills that you can take with you down the road. And then the other thing that I think would be beneficial, if we could just get this immigration mess addressed. And I'm not talking about opening up the borders and bringing in all these new workers, but when in 1986, when the Immigration Control and Reform Act was passed, there was about 5 million undocumented folks in the country, and they were offered the ability to get legal status under certain conditions, and about half of them did. About 2.5, 3 million became legal, and then the rest, for whatever reason, probably wouldn't qualify under the qualifying conditions. So they didn't. But that undocumented population since then has grown to about 11 or 12 million. And these are folks that are here that politically, it's obvious nobody's going to deport them. They're needed. If they left, they would devastate probably industries, not only construction, and I say devastate, they would hurt construction, agriculture, landscaping, hospitality, a lot of service industries. And so I think if we just took these 11 million and gave them some sort of legal status, maybe pay a back fine or something, and bring them out of the shadows, because there are a lot of those folks that are actually in that 1099 arena, getting paid either cash or as a 1099 employee, and bring them out of the shadows so that contractors like us could get our hands on them and work them legitimately and create a much more level playing field, because that hurts us tremendously in the competitive nature. I mean, I see it a lot in the interior trades, drywallers and painters and so forth, where, if you go in with a W-2 workforce, taxes and insurance and all that, it's hard to compete against one that goes in where everybody that's going to be on the job site is treated like a 1099 employee. And it's not to say that subbing and resubbing is not an okay practice, because it is, but at some point, the person that's actually doing the work should be an hourly employee and subject to wage and hour and withholding and all of that. And that just doesn't happen. And some of that will get addressed if they just address the immigration issue and take these 11 million that's here and ID them, get them to pay taxes, and get out of the shadows so that we could actually legitimately put our hands on them. And that would certainly add to the pool, so to speak. So those are things that maybe we don't have much control over. Unfortunately, the immigration issue is political. Education, I'm not sure where the changes can begin there. And of course, the owners and developers, I'm not sure how to change that. But those are all things that really would help us a lot. But in the meantime, we got to focus on what we can accomplish. And that was the things that I went over in the previous slide. So I don't want to hold everybody up, and I know you got a big day ahead of you. So I want to go ahead and move to my conclusion. So what I want to say just in conclusion is keep in mind, I was a little bit of a Debbie Downer. I think I acknowledge that, but I don't want to be. I just want to make sure everybody's, like I say, has a good sense of the reality out there. But the thing that we also need to keep in mind is subcontractors. I mean, we're can-do people. We're relentless. We can overcome anything, and we have. This worker shortage, like I said earlier, is nothing new. We've dealt with it. Maybe not as severe as it is today, but we found answers. We figured out how to build our projects and bring them in on time to the satisfaction of the general contractor and the owner. So we're can-do people. We'll make it happen. There's no doubt. And like I say, this is nothing new. It didn't start with the pandemic. This workforce shortage has been going on for decades, and we figured out how to handle it, and we'll continue to do that. Because subcontractors, I mean, we're extremely gifted people, okay? We know what we're doing. We're good at what we do, and we're going to continue to do that. I think the important thing in the message that I'd kind of like to leave you with is I think it's really important just to understand where we are and just to know some of the possible directions we can head that will ensure success in addressing our workforce issue. And so I think I hope I've presented some of those today. And so what I would say to you in closing is good luck on your journey. It is challenging, but we're going to get there. We're going to solve it, and we're going to go down the road, and we're going to build a lot of incredible projects in the future. So I want to thank you. Thank for your time today and allow me to present to you.